Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on NIC 2.0. My name is Justin Kirk and I'm the Executive Director of Delta Upsilon Fraternity and Foundation. And I have served as the Fraternity's Executive Director for 10 years this spring. I began as the Fraternity Executive Director in May of 2007 and added the Foundation Executive Director to my responsibilities in the spring of 2011. Today we're going to talk about NIC 2.0 and Delta Upsilon's role in establishing 2.0 and what the vision we have for fraternity communities going forward. But what I want to do is start with a story of how I got involved with NIC 2.0 and how we arrived at where we are today. In 2009, Delta Upsilon established our President's Task Force. That task force was established by our then President, Dr. Bernard Franklin. And he established that task force because we realized as an organization that we needed to evolve to meet the needs of 21st century higher education. And our conversations within that task force were really about how does DU become a relevant organization in this changing environment. The landscape in higher education was changing, our society was changing. And in 2009, we celebrated our 175th anniversary, and we wanted to set a course that would keep us relevant for the next century. And as we began to implement the task force recommendations and the strategic plan that followed, we were very successful in doing that. The fraternity's membership was growing, our average chapter size grew, our GPA was increasing, we had fewer risk management incidents, we had higher program attendance, we added some new educational programs, our foundation was seeing an increase in donations, and we received a couple national awards for our educational programs. But what I realized as the fraternity was seeing success is that we could never really achieve the success that we desired unless the entire industry changed. So Delta Upsilon could be successful, our chapters on an individual campus could improve, but really they were limited by the environment and the community in which they operated. So I began having a number of conversations with my peers, other executive directors from like-minded organizations, and many of them were having similar thoughts and ideas, thinking we got to change this community, we got to change our environment, otherwise our organizations would never be as successful as we wanted. And that was in 2012, 2013 that I started to have some of those conversations with my peers. But what we quickly learned, not everyone in the industry, not all of our peers saw the need for change. Now, there's an old wives' tale that if a frog is put suddenly into boiling water, it will jump out. But if it is put into cold water, which is then brought to a boil slowly, it will not perceive the danger and will be cooked to death. And this is really the analogy that when we think back to the 2012 and 2013, that many of our peers saw fraternity as we had a few more challenges, but we weren't really at a place where we needed radical change. But that really all changed in 2014 and 15 when there were a couple of high-profile fraternity incidents at University of Virginia and the University of Oklahoma. And those incidents, while they were not Delta Upsilon related, they impacted the brand of fraternity across the country. And those incidents, while unfortunate, really helped everybody realize that we truly were in a pressure cooker, that fraternities and sororities were reaching a tipping point and our very existence was being questioned in a manner that many of us had never experienced before. And that spurred everyone to begin asking, why change? Why was it necessary for us to come together to change fraternities? Now, we all belong to a trade association, which is the North American Interfraternity Conference, and 73 men's national organizations are all part of the NIC. And the trade association should be representing the industry, should be representing our interests, advocating on our behalf. And after significant reflection, our group of interfraternal leaders, we developed a list of concerns with the old NIC. There really was a lack of a campus support model. And we would never hear from the NIC unless there was a bad situation on a given campus. And what would happen would be there would be a situation on a campus, an email would come to the executives, and they'd ask for volunteers to go to the campus to help solve the problem. And so we were being asked to go solve interfraternal issues because we had a chapter there, and the NIC didn't really have a model that was going to support that campus and take that visit and make it successful in the future. There was a lack of trust. We just weren't seen as partners to our higher education partners. There was a lack of resources. There are many fraternity chapters around the country that had bigger budgets than the old NIC. We lacked a powerful voice. We were void of a message and a megaphone that would deliver that message. There was no strategic plan for the conference. And it took our members to come forward and say, we need a plan. Where is the plan? There was just no visionary leadership that was leading us. And frankly, there was just a lack of confidence. No one believed in collaboration, and primarily that was due to poor performance. And so we presented these concerns to the NIC board. We began to share them with other executives, and over the course of 9 months, there were a number of small meetings that became bigger meetings, and the cohort of executives who really wanted to see change continued to grow. So in that short period of time, ultimately, the NIC board stepped down and turned over the leadership to a group of fraternity executives to rebuild the trade association. And then in December of 2016, NIC 2.0 was approved by the NIC House of Delegates, with all 73 organizations supporting a new direction and a larger investment of our resources to make it happen. We all knew that we wanted to see change. We had a plan for the change, but frankly, the NIC's budget at the time just couldn't accomplish any of that change. And so we all agreed to increase our investment in the NIC to see that change happen. So coming out of our meetings, we created 4 or 5 priorities, and these are the 5 core areas: government relations, public relations, data-driven decisions, education, and campus support. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these priorities and what their impact can be. On the government relations side, we want to create a grassroots program to focus on all levels: the federal, the state, and the local level. And we established some key priorities, some key areas that we would focus our government relations efforts on. First, we want to maintain our single-sex status, and this is an area of great concern to many of us. If you followed what happened at Harvard earlier in the year, they essentially said that we do not believe that single-sex organizations have a place on campus any longer. And of course, we believe that single-sex organizations provide a valuable experience. And so we need to be advocating for our single-sex status. Second, student choice. We allow our students to choose where they want to go to school. They make a big investment to do it, and so we believe they're smart enough to decide what fraternity they want to join and when it is right for them to join. Many of our campus partners are putting regulations on who can join and when they can join, and create a lot of unnecessary policies. And so we're going to be focused on student choice. Third, due process. This really isn't about defending the guilty, but it's about making sure everyone has a fair process. And this relates to our own organizations. It's on the campus processes. We want to ensure that if an individual is accused of something or an organization is accused of something, that they have a fair process. And finally, the Collegiate Housing Infrastructure Act. And that act is so that when an alumni wants to invest in chapter housing, and so if you want to invest in renovating a chapter house, that'll be tax deductible. And so if an alumnus gives to a university for housing, it's tax deductible. But that isn't currently the case with fraternity and sorority foundations. And so that's one of our causes that we've taken up with Congress. And so in that priority, we need to be in the conversations on government relations, and we need to have some guiding policies by which we operate. Our fourth priority was public relations. And we're going to take a two-pronged focus on public relations. One, we want to advance the true brand of fraternity, basically to tell the story. We want to show the value of the experience that we all love so much. There is a real lack of marketing and messaging and communication when it comes to the good work and the good stories that our chapters and young men are doing day in and day out. All too often, the only stories that we hear about fraternity are the negative incidents or the brand that websites like Total Frat Move are promoting this frat image. And so we need to have a better effort to promote the value of the fraternity and sorority experience. And secondarily, when something does happen, when there is a crisis, we need to be ready. And that isn't to cover it up, but really to be ready to address it, and we can defend the students who are doing the right thing. All too often, whether it be on a campus level or on a national level, if there is a crisis, unfortunately, everybody else gets lumped in with the students who have done the bad behavior. And so we need to be prepared when those crises do come up. And so what we've done is we have a national contract with a PR firm out of Chicago that's providing resources and support to not only the NIC, but all individual organizations. And the NIC staff have people who are proactively monitoring the brand of fraternity, and we have some sophisticated tools that are tracking what's happening in the news, in the media, on social media. And by tracking what's happening and what's being said and where we have the biggest touches and impressions, we can have a highly coordinated communications program and effort. And finally, each organization has their own dashboard that I'm able to look at this dashboard on a daily basis and see how often Delta Upsilon is mentioned in the news, in the media, or on social media. It will also tell me who the biggest influencers are when they're talking about Delta Upsilon, what the issues are, the media breakdown, and whether it's a positive, negative, or neutral article. And so we have these dashboards for our entire organization, and then we have these dashboards for individual chapter incidents to monitor things when they happen. And finally, we just needed that megaphone. We needed to know how people are talking about fraternities and organizations. And while the PR effort is new, Delta Upsilon unfortunately has taken great advantage of this this fall semester. At Missouri, we had an incident in late September, and that incident hit most national news outlets, and it ran locally for weeks. And the incident also led to a number of other stories about the chapter, and even a public records request from one newspaper to the University of Missouri asking for all information that they had on record about our chapter over the last couple of years. The university provided that information. It was extensive on the chapter's discipline record history, and that led to another round of news stories. And in my 10 years as the fraternity executive, this was by far our biggest national news story. It had the most news mentions. It was on a regular basis. We were getting calls from news outlets across the country. But fortunately, because of this new PR effort from the NIC, we had access to the national PR firm. Delta Upsilon has never had a contract with a professional PR firm, and if we ever had to use one, it was on a case-by-case basis. And so by having the national PR firm working for the NIC and for Delta Upsilon, our team was able to use that PR firm. We had 5 conference calls with them just to talk through what had happened, what our response was going to be, and then the follow-up after the response, and how we would handle phone calls from media outlets, would we do interviews, and they were monitoring all the stories for us. We were prepared with statements before the articles were even hitting the news, and when we had calls for interviews and comments, we had our press releases prepared, and then we used their dashboard to monitor all the stories. And so the national PR firm is on call for any fraternity that needs it. And the hope there is that by having the national PR firm ready to engage, it will minimize the national impact of that story. So for Delta Upsilon, having that national PR firm and the emphasis on PR has certainly benefited us greatly. The third priority was, as an NIC and as an industry, we need to make more data-driven decisions. And so the NIC moving forward is going to be committed to building out a comprehensive data system which will empower our members to make decisions based on robust data instead of silos of information. So if you think about that, we have 2 million fraternity members worldwide, and there really is nothing that connects all of them. And there are many times that we need to be able to leverage all that leadership, whether it's to cultivate alumni, raise funds, to help get millions of people involved in those government relation issues that we previously mentioned. There is no central hub that would allow the industry to connect all of these alumni. So if something happened in an individual state, if we saw something in the South Carolina legislature, for instance, we would get an email from the NIC and they would ask, do you have any influencers in South Carolina? This data warehouse should already have that information. We should know who's in leadership roles, and we should be able to act more quickly if we have the data. Collecting the data will also let us look at and show the impact of fraternities over time. And so what would be valuable for me is to look at the metrics of Delta Upsilon on every campus, compare it to other fraternities on the same campus, look at it from a Big 10 snapshot, Big 12 snapshot, and just look at fraternities overall. And so right now I really just have Delta Upsilon's data to look at, but it would be valuable for me to have other organizations to benchmark and compare to. We're going to also develop a Angie's List type program, and so we'll create a platform for honest assessment, which will eventually drive change through transparency and benchmarking. And we'll do that at the national fraternity level, where Greek advisors will be able to rate organizations on whether or not they're responding to calls, do they service the chapters, are they offering programs, and then vice versa, where fraternities will be able to say, we're trying to work with X campus, but we're unable to get the campus professional to engage with us. And so those are the first three priorities: government relations, PR, and a data warehouse. And those three priorities aren't really about why we work with fraternities, but they really do help us, and they are necessary tools that will help broaden our reach. So how do we do all this? The most powerful engine for governance is not necessarily the headquarters, and it's not necessarily the university, it's the students and our chapters. And so what we have to do is rebuild that engine. We need our students to govern at the chapter level. They are the ones who are most invested in their success. We need to get the chapters back in charge of the governance and the governance of their communities. Our men on any given campus have relationships with their peers, whether it be other fraternity men, other sorority women. They are the ones that have the relationships. And what we know is that students will be more likely to listen to their peers than they will from somebody from the national headquarters. And so we need the students, first and foremost, getting back into self-governance. And then we have to get our alumni involved to help make sure the chapters stay healthy. Every one of our great chapters within Delta Upsilon have alumni involvement. And that needs to be the next step in that wheel. And if those things aren't working, the council, the local council, the IFC, needs to get involved. And this is where the NIC will be getting involved. Building community and council readiness to help govern each other. And so the NIC is going to work at the community level around accountability. How do we get agreement to meet expectations, and how do we get the IFCs and their local, whether conduct boards or judicial committees, to have buy-in around holding other organizations on campus accountable. What I hear so often from students and parents, whenever we're in a situation where a chapter has violated the loss prevention policy and we're trying to hold them accountable, I hear quite often, why are you holding us accountable when everybody else on campus is doing the same thing? And it's a tough one for me to answer. But I do answer by saying Delta Upsilon has standards, and we're going to hold our chapters accountable to those standards. But what we really need is for chapters and the community to hold each other accountable. So currently this model is flipped upside down. So right now we're relying on the campus administration or the headquarters to intervene when there's a problem. And we do not want to have a top-down approach. And we really just can't blame higher education for cracking down on us when we have these incidents, because if their reputation breaks down, People aren't applying to the school. They're losing donations. They're losing their ranking in the U.S. News and World Report. It has a cascading effect on them. So our success is not going to be found in more campus rules or organizational policies. It's the students embracing self-governance. It's in them holding their peers accountable. So we need to help them set expectations, develop the leadership, and to make it stick. And so that's going to start with, at the chapter level, we're going to need the alumni to support the chapter in their self-governance efforts, move it to the IFC and have the NIC supporting it, and then the last step is the national organizations and society holding accountable. So moving to priority number 2. We need to have streamlined, impactful education for everyone who touches fraternity communities, from student leaders to volunteers to staff to higher education professionals. So right now there's an IFC on most every campus, but the education that those IFC leaders receive is inconsistent. How we're teaching them to self-govern, how they structure themselves, there's just not a model that is being taught to everyone. And then our alumni leaders that are working with the IFCs or with the students, oftentimes they're unaware of the IFC's policies. They're unaware of the NIC's expectations and standards. And then the higher education professionals on any given campus, there may be a very different approach. And so what we're doing is working with interfraternal leadership to better train all of our IFC leaders, the volunteers that work with them, and the staff. And we have some industry-wide educational initiatives that are starting this year, and we will ramp them up over the next couple of years to ensure that everybody who is serving at an interfraternal level understands the direction and the policies and what we're trying to do. And finally, the last priority is a robust campus support model. The NIC is going to create resources for all campuses that will improve the communities at each level. And we know that there are small campuses that have smaller budgets. We know that there are very large fraternity communities that have pretty significant budgets. So we're going to create tiered levels. And if you think about like an airline membership or Sky Miles program, you have different levels that can be scaled up. And so we've created that model where IFCs and institutions can buy in at different levels based on the support and education that they want. We're going to build alumni IFCs that can provide coaching to our collegiate men on interfraternal level. The NIC is going to select focused campuses, and those campuses will get heightened support. And finally, the NIC is building a staff team that will be regionalized, that will work with the IFCs and build relationships over the long term. And so they recently hired a Southeast campus operations director, and that individual will live in the Southeast and work primarily with the schools there. He will develop relationships with the IFCs, develop them with the alumni leaders, and our goal is to have these folks in the positions for a 5 to 10 year period where they will understand the community, understand the issues, and they can support them locally. And so if I think about why all this is so important, especially to Delta Upsilon, and I started by saying why I got involved and why I think this is so important. I started to look at the forces that will shape a chapter's culture. And there's generally 3 areas. There's the campus culture, the NIC, and the general fraternity and what can be done. And in the present day, the international fraternity or the headquarters, based on our programs and initiatives, we do have an impact on a chapter's culture. But primarily, that culture is impacted by what's happening by the students and chapters around them. What we hope to have happen in the future is that that impact of the international organization will still be there, and we can provide strong education and services. And then the impact of the campus community will begin to be affected by the NIC's initiatives. They're all focused at that community level, working with the IFCs. And our goal is to then begin to flip the model where a greater majority of the campus community, culture, and behavior is being impacted by the NIC and the initiatives that we're working on. And so I mentioned earlier that there will be a Sky Miles type program for different campuses, and we've created this program where there's going to be 5 different levels for a campus IFC to buy into the services they want to receive from the NIC. And what we did here was we went out to almost all the vendors within the community that provide training on hazing and alcohol and recruitment, and we asked them if they'd be willing to be partners with the NIC. And so there's different levels of package here, and for instance, with the Diamond package, you would get a lot of programs for the IFC. You would get training for the alumni advisors. You would have a housing summit for the house corporations on campus. And so we tried to set up these packages for each community based on their budget and what their needs are, and how we could impact them at the community level. And so we land with 4 guiding assumptions. 1, there's going to be no silver bullets. There's not going to be a single solution that's going to fix all the negative aspects of our campus cultures. If there was, it'd be done by now. Collaboration is going to foster commitment. A top-down strategy of issuing a bunch of new policies without buy-in at the local level simply isn't going to move the needle. We need to spend more time engaging our stakeholders locally in solutions that will impact their lives and foster the commitment required for authentic change. But with that said, we plan to have a global strategy and local tactics. A cookie-cutter approach for 800 campuses won't work, and every campus that you advise, every one of our DU chapters is in a unique community. And we need our local folks to have ownership over the customized solution that aligns with this big vision and direction within the unique environment. Our chapter at the University of Florida is going to have a very different community solution than our chapter at Carthage. And so how do we take this global strategy and use local tactics to implement it? And finally, this is going to be one block at a time. Cultural change won't happen overnight. Each campus is going to need an intentional, phased approach that moves its local culture in a positive direction. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward with our 5 NIC priorities. Finally, we're going to focus on campus support, education, data-driven decisions, public relations, and government relations. But really, the approach is focused on those top 2 priorities. We want to support our communities, and we will provide consistent education for IFC leaders, the fraternity men, and the volunteers and staff that work with them. That is the stuff that really hits upon why we are fraternity men and why we have joined our organizations. And so I want to take the opportunity to answer a few questions. We have a couple questions already here, and if you have one, feel free to type that in the box, and I'll be able to respond to them. First question is, capital improvements to chapter houses, isn't that currently available through the CEA program? Yes, you can make tax-deductible gifts to the Delta Upsilon Educational Foundation for a percentage of the chapter facility. And what we're trying to do is have the limitations and restrictions on what percentage is tax-deductible to be lifted. And so right now, when house corporations make gifts for the renovations of a chapter facility, it's for the educational space. And in our reports that we've seen, typically that ranges from 22 to 45% of the chapter house that's deemed educational. And so that percent of the renovation, you're able to raise money for the renovation. And what our hope is that if we are building, we just built a new facility at Missouri 2 years ago, a $6 million chapter facility. We would like for all $6 million of that facility to be tax deductible. We believe that we would be able to raise a lot more money, and that our local house corporations would be able to raise a lot more money if all their gifts for housing was tax deductible. The next question we have is, isn't placing focus on NIC for direction and stepping back for international inconsistent with new programs that DUIF is starting? No, actually, much of what has been developed with the NIC has been modeled off some of the change efforts of a handful of fraternities, including the President's Task Force of Delta Upsilon. And so some of our new initiatives, we want to have some clear standards on what it means to be a DU chapter, but on many of those standards and how we're measuring chapters, we're measuring them based on some local standards and how they compare to their peers. So for instance, when we look at GPA requirements for chapters within the Men of Merit, we're not saying you need to have a specific GPA, but we want chapters to be at a level that is comparable to their peers. And so we are creating the programs that have standards, but yet on the ones that we can adapt to compare to their peers, we want to compare them to their peers. So it's going to be a both and for the NIC and for Delta Upsilon. But the NIC will have a set of standards that, regardless of which community, they will be standards that will be enforced across the board. Question is, federal tax codes, how can these be changed? And I think that relates back to CHIA. We've had a government lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. for the last 10 years. We have a lobbying firm there that has been working on fraternity and sorority related issues. And every April we send a couple hundred students along with fraternity and sorority leaders to lobby on the Hill. And so yes, they are federal tax codes, and our goal for CHIA is to have those tax codes changed through legislation. Next question is, it seems that the NIC is moving toward a consultant model. What happens if campuses do not sign up for one of the NIC plans? So every campus will take part in the basic plan, and that really is just determining what education and services they're going to get. Every community will be supported, and if we have and we will be monitoring what's happening within each of those communities, and if there is an issue, the NIC will take up that issue. And so this is where our local advisors can be especially helpful. Because I'm not there every day, because the NIC is not there every day, if you hear of changes that are happening at the IFC level, if there's new university policies that you believe will restrict some of our rights that we have or will restrict the way that we're able to do business, I would encourage all of you to please send me that information and I can pass it along to the NIC. Similarly, we find out that there often is restrictions placed on our chapter facilities from local municipalities, and we never hear of those until it's too late. And so what I would ask is for our local folks that if you see something or you hear something or you don't think the treatment's right or there's not due process, pass that information up and we will alert the NIC so that we're able to respond to it. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank everybody for their time today, and that will wrap up our webinar. If you have questions or just want to talk about anything that you heard during the webinar, please feel free to email me at kirk@deltu.org or give me a call at the fraternity headquarters, 317-875-8705. So please give me a call. Let's continue the conversation and If you do see something, please pass that along as well. And finally, I just want to say I really do appreciate everything that each of you do to support our chapters day in and day out. And Happy New Year, and have a good rest of your day.